Welcome to Sounds Like Portraits. I'm Philippe Ungar. This is a conversation with creative humans. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or Google Podcast. Sounds Like Portraits is also available on Frenchly.us. And if you like this show, remember to leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or a review. It really helps new listeners find us. Thank you. In this episode, you'll hear Dominique Borel talking about her story as an interpreter from English to French and from French to English. Generally speaking, an interpreter translates orally and instantly. It's a creative process because it's an act of adaptation between two cultures, two languages, and also two different personalities. Dominique told me that there are people who are not able to use an interpreter accurately, essentially because they speak too long and too quickly. In that case, some of what they say is going to be lost. Very rarely, there's another big challenge. What if the interpreter doesn't understand what has to be translated? That's the question of the week. And well, fleeing is an option. It's time to listen to her. And to start, she told me what she tried to do all her life.
All my life, I've always tried to be authentic.
What's the relationship between authenticity and interpretation?
Well, there's a relationship in that you want to be accurate in transmitting or interpreting the people that you are interpreting for their authenticity. So I suppose there's a connection in that. Yes.
So you have to understand it first. How do you do that?
It's intuitive. It's intuitive. There's not a lot of work involved with that. You simply have to have a feel for the person.
How did you come to interpreting?
My background is in theater. I felt frustrated when I would go sometimes to events that were being interpreted, and I didn't feel that they were accurate, and I kind of I would have liked to be the person doing it sometimes. I was raised bilingually, and it was very important for me to keep that. So I naturally was inclined to do things where I could work with both languages, and so that attracted me to it as well. I mean, I basically have an existence that's completely split between the two languages.
Between French and English?
French and English, and I like it that way. But it's a muscle that you want to keep exercising.
I saw you at work interpreting from French to English. Is it possible for you to interpret from English to French?
Yes, because the person that you're interpreting for needs you to do it for them. If they don't understand what's being said to them, you have to interpret back in the other language to them.
What kind of skills are required to be a good interpreter?
I think there are people skills involved, which have to do with being able to tap into different personalities and pick up how each person, functions a little bit. I think there's some of that, that's intuitive. I don't think that's something that you would study or figure out. You have to have a little bit of a feel for it. And then you have to have a certain amount of vocabulary. Depends. If somebody asks you to do something that's in a very specific industry or something, you may have to really beef up on it to be able to do it if it's something that you aren't naturally inclined to do. But you have to have a little bit, be a little bit familiar with whatever the venue is that you're going to be. I think there's a certain amount of quickness that you need because you get surprises.
What kind of surprises?
Well, you don't necessarily know what the person is going to say.
Of course.
Sometimes there's certain patterns. I mean, sometimes someone will repeat themselves and say the same thing over and over again, that kind of thing. But also, they are sometimes asked questions that are totally different than what they even expected to be asked. So you have to be ready for that.
I just want to know how you prepare yourself before an interpretation. What kind of questions do you ask yourself before interpreting?
Well, I have to tell you that I feel a little bit, and I thought about that before I came to do this interview, is I'm a little reluctant to get into that because I feel like it's sort of that everybody does it different, and I just sort of don't want to give away how I do it, if you see what I mean.
No.
You don't? No. I do certain things to prepare that I don't really feel like sharing necessarily, because I don't really know what other people do, and I don't want to give it away.
I'm going to tell you why I'm asking this question first. Sounds Like Portraits is about sincerity. It's about sharing the way we are doing something creatively. Right. Everybody tries to find his path.
That's true. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I never think of it as asking myself a question. I just try to find out about the person's area, about them, what their rhythm is, how they speak, that kind of thing.
Do you try to find interviews on YouTube or something like this?
Sometimes, yeah. I like to hear a live voice.
And do you talk before with the person?
In fact, never. Because people that I interpret for are busy people. And so it's basically when they get there to do the event is when I get there. So I may speak to intermediaries occasionally, but it's usually about logistical issues. So no. It's when I go to the event, that's when I meet them, and that's when I interpret them.
And you have to trust your feeling, you have to trust your first intuition of the person.
That really is a non-issue for me. That's not a weak point for me. That part of it is easy for me. So I trust my instinct.
Is interpretation a word-for-word translation?
Occasionally it is, but generally it's not. That's why it's called interpretation. First of all, if it was literal, it doesn't always translate what the person is saying, because you have to take it into the other culture and put it into the closest to what they're trying to convey, so that it's as accurate as possible to what they're trying to communicate. That's really what you're trying to do. You want to be as accurate as possible to what they're trying to communicate.
Do you have an example that comes to mind right now about this interpreting process?
It's a saucy example, but it was in relation to the person having said that it was in terms of a character that she was talking about, that the woman avait joui, okay? And the way I translated it was I said, had an orgasm. And she said to me afterwards, that's not what I'm trying to say. The question or whatever it was that was communicated was repeated at another juncture, and that time I translated it as when a woman reaches the height of pleasure, and that she was okay with. But you see, that's a very fine nuance, and that's an example where it wasn't inaccurate what I said, because it is actually, jouir is translated as an orgasm, but that wasn't exactly what she was trying to say.
I saw you at work. You use a notebook. What do you write on it?
So what I write is the key points of what the person is saying, so that I can have their thread, accurate. But I used to do that in my head, but you can get in trouble that way, because if it's somebody who talks a long time, and he did a few times.
So it was Mario Botta that day?
Yeah, it was Mario Botta that day. He did a few times where he would go, he would realize that he had talked a long time. He got caught up in the enthusiasm of the moment, and he had a lot to say. It's a profession which has a lot of specifics, and I wanted to be sure to be able to get the specifics.
And that's your job to adapt?
Absolutely, absolutely. And believe me, you thought he spoke a long time? I've seen a lot worse. So.
Tell me.
There are people who are not really capable of using an interpreter accurately. So they will just run away with the speaking and go on and on and on and on and on and on. Sometimes, depending on your relationship, you're able to kind of signal and to stop it, and sometimes you can't. So in that case, some of what they say is going to be lost because, first of all, there's a question of timing with the audience and with what's going on. And second of all, it's just too much. So you have to kind of bring out the key points and summarize it and do it like that.
Talking about timing, Do you try to interpret instantly or slightly after the speech?
Well, it depends what they request, but what they request here is consecutive. What you saw with Mario Botta is consecutive. So that's after. They speak, then you speak, and on like that. Simultaneous is obviously when you basically do it at the same time.
Did you experience that?
I've had some. Most people have asked for consecutive, but I've had a little bit of simultaneous translation.
What kind of special skill does it require? I mean, you have to be in the person's mind to be able to translate it simultaneously.
Well, first of all, there is, even though it's simultaneous, there is a fraction of a second. And you do sometimes have to let the sentence flow a little bit, etc. I have not had a lot of experience with simultaneous. The experience that I had, which I'm sure is deceptive, is that it was easier because you don't have to remember anything. You just have to keep going. That's probably deceptive. I think probably it was situations where I was very comfortable with the material. But if you get treacherous material, it's got to be, a little bit of tightrope.
Tell me about that. What if you don't understand the person you have to interpret? Did it happen to you?
Well, if you don't understand, first of all, you can say, "Excuse me, could you repeat that?" You're not going to do it every 5 minutes, but the occasional is fine. Simultaneous, you can't do that. So you just have to sort of skip over and hope that it's going to make sense to the person listening.
But did you experience not understanding at all?
No, I've never had that. I do have a friend who's an interpreter for the UN, and he's played me some examples of your worst nightmare, where you couldn't even understand that it was a language. So then I guess they just have to. And I also have another friend.
Did you just have to what?
Well, they just, I guess they have to make it up. Because I don't know. He never told me because the example that he played for me was not on his watch. It was one of his colleagues that had happened to. You just have to struggle and catch the words where you can and everything, but those people are very skilled. And I did have another friend who did not do interpreting on a regular basis, and she was asked to do a gig for the UN, as a matter of fact, and she had to run out of the booth because it turned out that what she was booked for was something very technical that had to do with some kind of software development or something like that. Never mind the translation. She didn't even understand the words in her own language. And the people that she was to be translating for kept turning around and looking at the booth. So she said she had to put the mic down. She just had, or the headset, whatever, and she just had to leave.
What is your worst experience in interpreting?
I've never had a really horrible experience, I have to tell you. I've never interpreted for somebody that I didn't like. So that's the first thing. I would say the most difficult is the ones that we just went over. It's when the person just could not stop talking and did not really take into account, doesn't know how to work with an interpreter really. Sometimes it's because, and I can feel it when I meet them, sometimes it's because they're very nervous about what they're going to do. So that's one example. I had another example, which was not my worst experience in terms of the interpreting, because there ended up being very little to interpret because the person was so panicked about speaking in front of an audience that it was beyond panic. So we had to manage that, and the interpreting was really the least of it. You had to manage how the person was going to be able to function.
What did you do?
I just stayed very calm. We all did. We had to stay very calm. And this person had written down a few sentences and said, "Vous allez dire exactement ce que je vous dis." So I said, "Okay, fine, no problem." And he had written it down on a napkin, and he said, "This is what I want to say." And believe me, it was something very simple. And I said, "Okay." And then when we got in front of the audience, he said his couple of lines. I went up to the mic. I said the same lines in English. And then we finished. And after we went off stage, he said, "That was good, right? That was good." And I said, "It was perfect. It was absolutely perfect." So you had that, but that was not my worst experience. I mean, that was a little bit of a heartbreaker, frankly. The worst, and I don't even like to use the word worst, but the more challenging is when you get somebody who can't stop talking. And it's not, they can't stop talking, and it's not necessarily simple things that they're talking about. Sometimes it involves nuances and complexity.
Do you have a personal style in interpreting?
Not consciously. It's me. Interpreters are supposed to be traditionally very, very neutral. And I think probably my personality bleeds over a little bit because, or it's not even my personality, but I bring over the personality of the person a little bit. So if you would call that a personal style, I suppose it's a personal style. I don't speak in a flat tone. It's not that I try to or don't try to, but my natural impulse is if they're expressive, I'm a little bit expressive.
Do you have sometime this feeling of making the oral speech you're interpreting clearer than the original?
Occasionally, yes.
So occasionally the interpretation is better, it's clearer than the original speech.
It's not that it's better, it's that it's stripped down slightly so that the essentials come out a little bit more boldly. I don't experience it as I'm going to make this clearer or I'm going to clarify this. I don't experience it that way. I experience it as more trimming it down maybe a little bit in order to aid in terms of the time restraints that we have sometimes.
What kind of experience are you looking for yourself in interpreting?
I like the connection. I like the connection with the person I'm interpreting for. I like the connection with the people I'm interpreting to. And I like the universes of these people that I'm brought in to interpret for. So I guess I also, I don't, none of it is conscious. I don't look for any of these things consciously, but I naturally like that connection.
That's the last stage of the interview. I call it the moment of solitude. Please hold the microphone and add whatever you want to the interview.
This has been a very gentle interview process, and in some way I feel that it involves certain interpreting skills in terms of understanding what was required to be able to communicate accurately about what I do with interpreting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique, for sharing your story. It was Sounds Like Portraits, a podcast by Philippe Ungar. Please visit soundslikeportraits.com, and if you like this show, remember to leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or a review. It really helps new listeners find us. Thank you. Musique Charmeuse de Serpent, composed and conducted by Olivier Glisson. See you soon for the next episode.